are listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards. Hello, and welcome to this May 7th edition of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards, and our show this week is a continuation by popular demand. We're going to, again, be discussing The Men of Goodwill, continuing it from a month ago. So we're back, and this is going to be fun and interesting, just like last time. My guests today are back, and we're still friends, even after talking about religion, politics, and race the last time. We're going to talk about those issues again and add manhood to the apparently not flammable enough mixture. So Stephen Simpson is a pastor in Alabama, and Rob Ryan is an attorney in Georgia. I'm in my home base in Texas. Gentlemen, thank you for being here again.
Thank you, Melvin.
Thank you, Melvin.
The last time we were here, Rob's voice was about to give out, but he powered through it, and today he's feeling much better. So in our episode this week, we will resume our mini roundtable discussion with some of the most volatile aspects of American life. And again, I'm going to be an active participant rather than just an interviewer. As I mentioned in the previous episode, all three of us are former Republicans and are now independent. We're between the ages of 50 and 60, and we've been without a political home for nearly a decade. We're also evangelical Christians, though I'm not really sure what that term even means anymore. So, gentlemen, let's start there with trying to define what, to you, an evangelical is.
Well, historically...
Let the pastor or the layman go first is the question.
Let's let the pastor go first.
Gee, thanks a lot. Well, first of all, I'm with you, Melvin, in the sense that that term has become really fuzzy in recent years as to what it means and how it's used and who identifies. And I'm afraid that what was a good term has now been tainted and polluted quite a bit. Historically, I've understood being an evangelical simply as being someone who bears the good news of the gospel and shares it, lives it. We are traditionally considered Protestant in our orientation, but our focus is on the truthfulness of the Word of God, on a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. We believe in salvation through his death on the cross and his resurrection. We believe in telling others about the good news and serving others. That's been a basic definition. Unfortunately, now it's really taken on a political tone, some kind of political or nationalistic identity. And we can talk more about that later, but I'll stop for now.
All right, Rob, how about you?
Well, I mean, that's my understanding. As just a layperson that's been in the pews for all my life, it is much like some of the highlights Stephen hit on. Evangelicals, typically meaning Protestants, people of the book, in other words, people who put a high value on the tradition of the Word of God, on the Bible, Old and New Testament. People who are mission-oriented, as Stephen touched on, to go out and spread the news of the gospel. And I do agree that these days the term itself has taken on, at least in the United States, political connotations that it seems very different. To me, as a young person growing up in Southern Baptist Convention churches, and I'm sure politics was there. I'm sure it was always there. I can recall one pastor from the late 80s who was quite political, and I attended that church, and I was a teenager. But I can also, my majority view growing up was that politics didn't really come into the local church that much, that it really was more about, in fact, there were a lot of people who would say we shouldn't be involved in politics at all, that was secular, that was worldly, and our focus should be more on going out, telling about the gospel, sharing Jesus with others. And so there seems to be been a real change there.
Well, for me, the term evangelical has, again, been poisoned like a lot of other terms in our culture today. And I actually stopped using that term quite a while ago, probably even 20 years ago. And if someone asked me what type of Christian I am or what do I believe, I say I'm a follower of the way. And I know that Christians understand what that means. And then if you don't understand, then that's an opportunity for me to describe what it means. I mean, Jesus said, I am the way. And the early Christians, they didn't call themselves Christians. They called themselves followers of the way. And so I figure that's a good opportunity to open up a discussion, and because most people don't understand that term, it's not threatening to them. So that is a good way to begin the conversation. So now the second question I've got here, this is going to be interesting. Are you an alpha male?
Well, so I had in between finishing work and starting this podcast today, I had a quick meet up with my wife, who goes by Mrs. Emily Finch on Twitter, and I kind of went over these questions with her to see what she thought about some of these. And I asked her if I was an alpha male, and she just kind of laughed. But
did she hurt your feelings?
I don't know particularly what that means. I think one thing that she did say is that there is a continuum of everything. And so certainly there are, hyper masculine, and masculinity is not necessarily a bad trait. I know we'll talk about that in a minute. And then there are those who are not very masculine at all. And in between, there's a whole range. And so, I mean, I consider myself something of a leader. I own a business. I've got employees I lead. I do not by any means attempt to tell my wife what to do. She is her own person, but I do think she looks to me sometimes to lead in certain situations. I would not describe myself as an alpha male, but I do believe in proper context, masculinity is a good trait, and it should be a good trait.
Oh, I certainly agree. I'll let other people decide whether or not I'm an alpha male. I don't think of myself that way. In fact, I think if I have to go out and beat my chest and declare what an alpha I am, then I'm probably not. And I believe that a lot of people have gotten masculinity confused with being macho. And really, those two things are not the same. Certainly on social media today, we see a lot of people posturing themselves, even directly calling themselves alpha males. And really, I have to laugh. I just have to laugh at them. I feel sorry for them that they're so insecure.
Yeah, for me, I don't think there's any question that I'm not an alpha male, and I don't want to act like I am. I don't pretend to be. That's not my role. But it's not just an option of alpha or beta. I think that's what a lot of people think. And I'm not a beta male either. And I've actually done some research on this in the last week since we started talking about these topics. And the closest I think I've come to defining myself through the terms. I think there's 6 terms for male, and it's a sigma. And I'll let you go and look that up because I don't want to go too deeply into the psychology of all this. But I know I've got a rare personality, and most people have never been able to understand me, including my parents when I was a kid. And that's one of the things that I carry in my heart that was the most precious to me with my dad, because me and my dad were very different from each other. He was definitely an alpha male. He had a very deep voice, and it was like intimidating, and I was really small for my age generally. And I know my dad didn't understand me, but I know he loved me. He didn't understand it. And today he would probably understand more psychology of it. Like, I didn't understand myself until I was 40 years old. I came across a book called A Highly Sensitive Person. And I read that, and it was like, it may as well have had my name in the book, because it helped me understand a lot of things about myself. And all of that, saying all of that, coming back around to the first premise, I'm not an alpha male, but I'm definitely not going to let somebody walk all over me and walk over my family. If you want to find out, come mess with my family. You'll find out. And
Right.
We'll just leave it at that. I don't recommend you running up on us and thinking you're going to intimidate me, because you're just not. I'm not going to have a long discussion about it, but the whole issue will be resolved quickly. We'll just leave it at that.
As the culture seems to have become coarser and coarser, and I blame this on a lot of different things. I do think Trump is part of it. His belligerence, his attitude, the way he speaks about other people. But then it also has to do with things like television, violence we see in movies, things of that nature. If you ask people this question about an alpha male, they may think that's somebody that's loud, that's somebody that's boisterous, that's somebody that's belligerent. And I don't think that's true at all. I think those people are often very insecure. They often don't feel like they don't understand their role in life. And they're taking it out on other people. So is there any more alpha male we can think of than Jesus? And we look at how he lived in the New Testament, and he was very strong. Even Satan could take him up and offer him these temptations, and he would resist. And certainly nobody bent him to do what they wanted. He always followed God's will, but he was extremely sensitive to those around him, extremely sensitive. And we can see how he lived his life and how he died. And so it's not what people think it is. This macho culture that we see out there is not the way that a real man behaves. And I think about the Greatest Generation, too. Those guys that fought in World War II, most of them, if you knew them, and we knew them, they were our grandparents, a lot of them were quiet. They were hard workers. But you didn't mess with them. Like you were just saying, Melvin, there were lines you didn't cross. But they didn't have to tell you. You just knew it.
Absolutely. Right. You made me think about Audie Murphy, who was, if you haven't, if anybody knows who he was the most decorated American during World War II. And I saw his uniform he was from Texas, so I saw his uniform in the Museum of Texas History. And he was tiny. He was probably 5'4" and maybe 110 pounds. But clearly a brave man. So whatever people think of masculinity, Nick Adams thinks he's the most masculine man in America. And it's really sad because, well, first, he's sort of like a carnival sideshow. And in some ways, I think he wants to be that. But another side, I think he actually believes it. And the way I always say it is, I think you alluded to it, Stephen, if you have to tell people, then you're not. Yeah. If you are, people know. They will recognize it. You don't need to brag about anything. If you are something, people will tell you that you're that thing. If you're telling them, you're probably not.
Sometimes you can see it in someone's eyes. You can look a man in the eye and know, is he serious? Another word is gravitas. There's just something about it, at least for me, you kind of know who you can mess with and who you can't. And a lot of it, too, is circumstantial. It's there within you. It's like you were saying, Mel, you're one of the kindest people I know. But I also understand what you're talking about. If someone were to come against your family or your loved ones, I wouldn't want to mess with you. I wouldn't want to do that because I believe you're serious about that. And, my goal, like you said, Rob, I'm not trying to be an alpha. I'm certainly not trying to be like Nick Adams or Andrew Tate or Joe Rogan. I'm more interested in being like Jesus Christ, the greatest man who ever lived.
Absolutely. All right. So why do you think there's such an emphasis on the basest definition of masculinity these days?
Well, I think, people are very captivated these days by performance or performative behavior, strutting around like a peacock. I just believe that the times in which we live, there's a lot of shallowness. And people don't take the time to go deep with someone. And so who's got the flashiest car, who's got the most bling, who's got the most cash, who's got the most women, who uses the best drugs, who's the best athlete, who's the most ripped, who can go to a church and climb up a pole and swallow a sword and take his shirt off. These are things that impress people. I'm just using that as a hypothetical.
Hypothetically. Well, of course, that would never happen in a men's conference somewhere in Illinois.
Never. Not in Missouri, anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, I do believe that we've just come to a place of really shallow understanding about a lot of things. But certainly about what is it that makes a man. And so it's very temporal. Scripture says, man looks on the outside, but God looks at the heart. And we've become less and less reflective as a people, less and less considerate, less and less listening, less and less looking at actual results, and more about who's popping off at the moment with the loudest noise, and we have short attention spans. And so as soon as we see someone strutting around and making loud boasts, we think, oh, now there's a tough guy. That's exactly the opposite of how it really works.
I don't think we can overlook the influence of Trump on this. Not that he's caused it all. He may be more of a symptom. I don't know. But we're 9 years into his era of dominating American politics, and he is exactly the kind of guy that Stephen was just describing. It's all about getting the most money, the most wealth, the most power, the most women, the most toys, the most people looking at you and saying how great you are, whatever, at whatever cost. And about being loud, about being boisterous, about just being offensive, just for the sake of being offensive. And we've had a daily dose of it for nearly a decade now from the top. I mean, whether you like them or didn't like them, every president I can think of, Obama, Bush, Clinton on his good days, the other Bush, Reagan, Carter for sure, they all adhere to a certain standard as the top leader in the country. And now that's just been completely thrown by the wayside. And there are young people. I know there are young men, because I've known quite a few of them, teenagers who are looking at that and they're taking notes about it and saying, this is how you get ahead.
Yeah.
All right. So what do you think compassion is in this era? How would you define that term?
You want to take that one, Rob?
Sure.
All right, I can go first if you want me to.
Okay, you're the boss.
Give you guys a chance to think about it a little bit. Well, to me, when I think about compassion, I think very literally, and of definitions of words. And to me, the term literally means to suffer with. So I think we tend to think of it as feeling sorry for somebody or doing something for somebody. But I think it's deeper than that. It means to suffer with. So, for instance, if I see someone whose car breaks down on the side of the road, it's not compassion for me to just feel bad for that person. I need to go there and sit with them until the tow truck shows up. And if it's a hot day, to get them something to drink, if they've got little children in the car, to get them a snack or something so they can remain calm. For me, it means to go through with them whatever they're going through at the time. If somebody just lost a family member, it's not enough for me to just say, I'm sorry for your loss. If they're open to it, if I can go there and sit with them and hold their hand and have them tell me stories about their loved one, to just think about those memories. That's much more compassionate than just feeling sorry for somebody. There's actually an action attached to the term rather than just an emotion.
I think we need more compassion these days for sure. I can tell. I'll just be honest with y'all. It's not my strong suit. I'm more of the kick you in the rear. Let's come on, get going, and get back on our feet and keep moving. it's just my nature. It's just my personality. And my wife will tell you that I need to be more compassionate at times. But there's a word that occurred to me, which is respect. And I think whether we're talking about hypermasculinity, lack of compassion, all these things, a lot of it boils down to, do we have a respect for our fellow man? And we seem to have kind of lost some of that these days.
I think that's an essential point, Rob. Seeing the imago Dei, the image of God in the folks around us, even folks we don't like or agree with, and understand that there's something of God within them, that he made them and they are precious to him and therefore should be to us. And there's a strong correlation between compassion and empathy. But compassion, as you said, Mel, goes into action. It's not just feeling, but it's acting. And I think you can be a tough guy in terms of, encouraging people to, buck up and be strong and let's get up and get moving. And at the same time, do so in a spirit of compassion. I don't see those things as antithetical. Sometimes helping folks get up and get moving is the most compassionate thing you can do. But we balance, speaking the truth in love and with a motive always to do good, even sometimes in a rebuke. Let the motive be to do good. And by the way, this is something I fail at pretty often. And something that I'm still trying to work out at my advanced stage. And hope I get there. And you guys are both good examples of that.
One of the things I've seen online in recent months is, you mentioned the term empathy, Stephen. And unfortunately, some Christians, some self-defined Christians, have attached empathy to the term woke. And I probably shouldn't get into to that side, the woke side of it. But
here we go.
Is it reasonable? Is it expected for a Christian to be empathetic?
Was Jesus empathetic? That's my question. If he was, should we? To me, that's the starting point. Well, I think certainly he was. He was compassionate. He identified with people where they were. He dined, not dined. He partied with prostitutes, tax collectors, and rumors went out about Jesus. They talked about him because of who he hung out with. But Jesus genuinely loved being in that environment, and everybody in that environment genuinely loved him being there. He was the life of the party. When Jesus came around, it made everything better and happier. And so, yes, Jesus was empathetic. He empathized with people in their weakness, their brokenness, their sorrow, their tears. And he came and stood alongside. He identified and made a way to bring people into a better place.
Well, for me, I think empathy, I think I probably have a different view of empathy than a lot of people. I don't think it's something that can be taught. I think it's something that you either have or you don't. And while I think everyone should try to be empathetic, and it's certainly a welcome trait, I don't think everybody's capable of it. I just think that some people's personalities don't allow for it. But they can still be kind. They can be respectful. They just may not have the capacity to feel something that somebody else is feeling. And I think I mentioned the term earlier, highly sensitive person. People hear the term sensitivity and they think it means you cry all the time. And I don't think that's it at all. For me, it's like bright lights bother me. Loud sounds bother me. But it also means that I can actually feel sometimes what somebody else is feeling. And I used to think that was a curse. And as I've gotten older, I realize that's a blessing to somebody, somebody who's suffering, somebody who's going through a certain situation of loss in their family. And I can feel what they're feeling sometimes. And it's draining. It's emotionally draining. But if I can bring some comfort to somebody, I think that's something that I should do. That's something that I have to do. So I certainly don't think that's a weakness. I'm a Christian and I have that sensitivity. I don't think I have that because I'm a Christian, but because I am a Christian, I think the expectation is there for me to serve someone who needs that service at that point in their life.
I think I'll push back a little bit. I hear what you're saying, Melvin, and you may have a gift for empathy, and spiritual gifts would be beyond this discussion. But I do think those of us I do think we can learn to be more empathetic because, and I actually had a quote teed up for this one. It's perfect because it's from To Kill a Mockingbird. And so Atticus Finch said, you never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. And I think that's a good definition of empathy. It's seeing things from the other person's point of view. And I look back in my own life, I was not, as a young person, very empathetic at all to people who maybe came from a different background or a different culture or a different religion or a different whatever. I guess like a lot of people probably, but maybe particularly Southerners, I just thought our way was the best way. The way we were raised was the best way. The way the values we have were the best values. And if you didn't share that, I wasn't necessarily interested in seeing things from your point of view. But I've certainly changed a lot over the years, over the decades in that. And so I do think we can learn to see things from the other person's point of view, somebody who may differ from us, who may come from a very different background. We can't put people in a box. We have to try to understand how they view the world. And then, like Stephen said, meet them where they are. And not in a threatening way, not in a I'm better than you way, but in a, let's try to understand each other way.
Well, I withdraw my previous objection.
Well, I do think that there is a sense of where, again, both are true. Empathy is kind of a starting point. I can't fully identify with a person whose experience in life is different than mine. But I can begin to learn more about that person, listen to that person, and deepen my compassion for them. Jesus, he empathized. He came to earth. The perfect God came and lived as man and fully God at the same time. And as he lived, he experienced things that he had not experienced before as God in heaven. Weakness, tiredness, hunger, lack. Those were things that he had not experienced in heaven. And so he loved us while he was in heaven, but then he came and walked among us and was one of us. And it was not just empathy, but then sympathy. One thing that Jesus certainly could not identify with was Jesus was not a sinner. And yet he empathized with sinners until that moment on the cross where Scripture says he was made sin for us. And so now Scripture says we have a great high priest in heaven who is Jesus, who sympathizes with us in our weakness because he experienced all of that on the cross. Now, if you want me to explain all of that, I can't. It's too awesome of a mystery, but I believe it with all my heart. And that's a model for me going forward.
Okay, so now we're going to get a little bit more into the political part, even more than we have so far. All right, so I saw some statistics the other day that show some racial breakdowns among Trump voters in 2020, and then they were broken down between evangelicals and non-evangelicals. Again, this is 2020, not 2016. So among evangelicals, 82% of white voters, or 82%, well, white voters, 82% voted for Trump. Black evangelicals, 16% voted for Trump. Hispanic evangelicals, 47%, and Asian evangelicals, 54%. But among non-evangelicals, white voters were 41%, so exactly half of the white evangelicals. Blacks were 6%, less than half. Hispanic, 26%. Asian, 23%. So think about those for a second. And I'm tying that question to the controversy of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those who decry DEI, do you think this is sort of Trump's world definition of an acceptable diversity when you got twice as many evangelicals of different races voting for him than not voting for him?
Well, so I looked it up because I knew it was one of your questions, and I knew what the words were, but I didn't have a definition for them. So the source I found says diversity refers to presence of variety within the organizational workforce. Includes gender, culture, ethnicity, religion, disability, class, age, opinion. Equity refers to concepts of fairness and justice, fair compensation, substantive equality, and I think that's where a lot of the controversy has come in on this. Equity versus equal outcomes versus equal opportunities. And then inclusion, organizational culture that creates an experience where all employees feel welcome, their voices will be heard. But, the statistics you just cited, this is why, as somebody from an evangelical Southern Baptist background, I've had such tremendous difficulty with my brothers and sisters this past nearly 10 years. Because the fact is, not every white evangelical voted for Trump or any other race. But without their support, he would never have been in office and he would never be a political force today. They are the bedrock linchpin of his support. And you think, how could that be? I mean, all the stuff we've been talking about leading up to this, compassion, empathy, characteristics of being a Christian, how could that be? And, to me, the DEI thing is a bit of there's always something, Melvin. I mean, as long as I've been alive, there's been something. First it was integration, then it was secular humanism, then it was abortion, now it's DEI. It ping pongs back and forth. There's always something. This is the latest thing. Has there been overreach in some academic circles? Has maybe this idea of equality of outcomes been taken too far? I'm sure it has. But then it's just being used as the latest thing to get everybody outraged. And that's how I see it. But I just, to this day, and I've tried for nearly 10 years, I cannot wrap my mind around the idea that the people who taught me to believe the things I believed in now form the bedrock of support for a man as depraved, and that's what he is, depraved as Trump. I just cannot understand it.
When we consider the kingdom of God, Scripture tells us that every nation, every tongue, every tribe, every ethnicity is invited and welcomed into the kingdom. I almost get the feeling sometimes that some folks who look like me and were raised like me would be disappointed to know that heaven is that way, and that we will stand together and worship the Lord together with brothers and sisters of all different ethnic backgrounds and cultures, languages, and the idea that it is somehow intrinsically bad to open the door as wide as possible for everyone to get in, I don't understand that. To me, it doesn't represent my understanding of the kingdom of God and what the Lord wants. It certainly doesn't play into a society such as ours where there is such a diversity. We're not one race, or we're not one ethnicity. We're not one language. We're not one culture, one background. We're not one religion. And there's a necessity of us learning more about one another and being welcoming of one another if our society, if the American Constitutional Republic is going to stand, then we have to learn that. Certainly in the church, it can't be that way. We've all heard, how Sunday morning at 11 o'clock is the most segregated hour in America. It should not be that way. I respect if people want to worship according to their own traditions, but there needs to be more opportunity for us to come together. And perhaps if we had more of those opportunities, there would be less of this serious divide in the way that we see some of the issues that affect politics. So I don't see DEI as intrinsically wrong. And I think Rob is right. I think DEI is just the latest boogeyman that's been put forward by people like Christopher Rufo and others. They're looking. It was CRT or it's woke or whatever. And let me just be blunt here. In some quarters, I believe that terms like CRT or DEI or woke is some people's way of saying the N-word.
Yes, I agree. I've said, I'll come back to you, Rob, in just a second. I've said before that it's sort of a modern term for uppity. And then,
right.
And usually uppity is an adjective for the N-word that you just talked about. And it's frustrating to me. But Rob, I'll let you go ahead, and then I want to come back to DEI for just a second.
Well, I wanted to ask you, Mel, because I don't want to paper over it. The stats you threw out, sure, the 82% of white evangelicals jumps out, but also among Hispanics, Asians, and Black evangelicals, 16% is not a huge number, but it's a lot larger than the other 8% number you gave. Why are across all these groups? Why does Trump have such an appeal to evangelicals, no matter what race they are?
I think Trump panders to us as evangelicals. I think he's made promises, and unfortunately, some of the so-called prophets and pundits and preachers out there have played along with Trump and sold him as somehow the savior of Christianity in America. And this has now been cast as a battle between God and Satan, or Trump and Satan. And he has learned, and the grifters have learned how to appropriate our language and our culture and use it against us for political gain.
Well, I think it's even more simple than that. I think it comes down to abortion. I think evangelicals, that's been number one issue for evangelicals for 50 years. And Trump, they saw Trump as a sort of like the last best hope for getting rid of abortion. It's funny that now that Roe versus Wade is no longer the law of the land, is like you're wandering around. It's like the Inigo Montoya in Princess Bride, after he had been preparing a whole lifetime to confront the six finger man. After he finally had accomplished that, he didn't know what to do with the rest of his life. And I think that's what we're about to see in this election. I think there's going to be, as we get closer to the conventions, there's going to be less cohesion. And so the 82% of the white evangelicals who may stick with them, but I don't think it's going to be 82%. It may be 75%. 16% of Black evangelicals, maybe 10%. And those incremental decreases will be the difference between a win and a loss. So it's going to be interesting to see. But I do want to come back around to DEI real quickly. From my perspective, again, like Rob said, DEI, and Stephen, you said DEI, CRT, and woke, and some of those other terms are sort of like code words or boogeyman terms. One term that I've always disliked and tried to avoid using is white privilege, because I think that's too easily misunderstood. People assume you're talking about money and that you think that everybody has inherited their money when people will say, no, I worked hard for it. And it's not about that. It's about, to me, I see it as greater opportunity and even an advantage. And so I think a lot of people who are opposed to DEI don't want to lose that advantage, because I think they may not be able to consciously define this, but I think they're aware that without some kind of government intervention, then there will likely be less diversity, less equity, less inclusion. And if that's the case, then most white men will have the advantage. And I think in their minds, whether they're conscious of it or not, that's the way they prefer it. So if they think they're going to lose their advantage, that's a threat. Rather than more people having an opportunity, they think that this is a pie with a certain number of slices, and if somebody else is getting a slice, then that's one less slice for them. When you can just bake another pie, everybody can have their own pie.
Well, and that kind of gets to we were all sort of more like Reagan conservatives or Bush conservatives or whatever you want to call it. I think we all believed the pie could get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Right.
So there was more opportunity for everybody. And somebody taking your piece of the pie doesn't mean, or somebody getting a piece of the pie doesn't mean they're taking your piece of the pie. We can make the pie bigger for everybody, which is what we ought to be doing.
I agree. All right. So is politics more important to you now than it was 10 years ago? Or how important is it to you? And is it more important or less important than it was 10 years ago?
I feel a lot of mixture in that. It's certainly important. Having the right leadership in the country is important to all of us. But I certainly believe that I have a more healthy perspective on politics than I did 10 or 15 years ago. And what people are capable of getting accomplished in politics. In some ways, I'm probably a bit more cynical. I think all of us could name politicians that we had high hopes for who have seriously disappointed us or broken our hearts because we discovered at the end of the day with all of the high ideals they were espousing, they were just cynical and corrupt people like a lot of other politicians. And so, it's certainly forced me to look toward more eternal truths and look for more commonality in relationships with people who I may disagree with politically. So the priority of politics in my relationships with people, I think, has decreased. I hope so.
Well, my wife and I don't talk about politics with any of our family or hardly any of our friends anymore. And so from that standpoint, because we can't, I mean, we can't, we cannot. And from that standpoint, it's not something that's discussed as much. But I do think overall, in times of crisis, politics is always there. What politics is really about relationships, and it's about how do we organize society, and how do we have a government that works for all of us, hopefully. But when things are going good, like in the 90s, we had won the Cold War. Clinton benefited from 8 pretty peaceful years. There were a few things going on around the world, but politics seemed maybe less important. To me, these past several years, in a time of crisis, in a way, politics become more important because it's not eternal. It's not the most important thing. If Trump wins again, we'll make it. The three of us will be here. If we're not in the concentration camp, we'll be okay. But
that's a big if there you just threw into the.
So it's not ever the most important thing, but I do think it assumes more importance in times of crisis because we don't want to turn over a country to our children and our grandchildren where we no longer have a functioning democracy, where we no longer have all Americans treated equally, where we no longer have representation, where we no longer have what I've devoted my entire adult life to, which is the rule of law. So it is, for me, whatever happens to me happens, but I want my children and grandchildren to inherit what's good about America. And politics is a way to try to make sure that happens.
I absolutely agree with Rob on that. You think about people in Russia today. Are they better off under Putin, or would they be better off under another leader? I think the answer is obvious. That man has devastated Russia in some ways as much as he has other nations. And the wrong leader in America could do that as well. So I think it's important for us to be alert, to be aware, to participate in the process, to pray about our vote. We pray for our leadership. When President Trump was our president, I prayed for him daily. Now I pray daily for President Biden. But I think it's important. I just think my ultimate hope is elsewhere, as you said, Rob. I really personally don't want to go to any camps, but I do understand that under certain scenarios of certain people wanting to be a dictator, it's not out of the realm of possibility.
Well, but to be fair, he did say he wanted to be a dictator from day one, on day one.
Right.
But again, the way to look at that is you can't be a dictator. You can't be the dictator for the whole 4 years if you don't start on day one. So that's another way to look at it.
Right.
All right. So here's the big question here. This is the question that's going to cause people to talk and to discuss, hopefully, in a rational way. Would Trump be more dangerous if he wins in 2024? Or if he loses in 2024?
If he wins.
If he wins in 2024, or if he loses in 2024?
If he wins.
Okay.
I can't fathom it, really. You would be, if you think about, when I think about Trump's 4 years in office, yes, we made it through, not without an attack on the United States Capitol that none of us had ever imagined we would see. But we made it through. We'd probably make it through 4 more years. But to me, above and beyond everything else, the real detriment of Trump being in power was the way it divided the country from the Congress all the way down to the level of our individual families. It almost not. I'm not scared of Trump, but the idea of what could happen if he's in office terrifies me, because I know how it could affect right down to our individual communities, neighborhoods, families, relationships. Him being in office makes this country a worse place. And it affects all of us in a very negative way. It affects our psyche. I believe it affects our psyche to have to, we can kind of ignore him when he's out of power to a certain extent. I mean, we all like politics, so we keep up, we follow him, but we don't have to. But if he's president, you can't get away from it. You cannot get away from it. And I just have a hard time wrapping my mind around what that would be like for 4 more years and the damage that could be done.
Is there a danger that if Trump were to lose, that he could somehow stir up or incite more violence? Certainly. But as Rob said, the danger, I think, is far greater if he is president again, because he will have power. Donald Trump is fundamentally a scofflaw and a lawless man. And when someone like that has the reins of power, he will use that in every way to do what he wants to do. We used to say, don't take Trump literally, it's all hyperbole. I think we've learned that it's really not, that we need to take him literally in what he says. Not only would he affect our country, I believe, in a detrimental way. And by the way, I am not endorsing Joe Biden or anyone else. I'm simply stating a historical record here. We also know that Trump would have a devastating effect internationally. He would embolden and enable Putin and Xi of China. He would sell out Taiwan. And frankly, I'm convinced that he would sell out Israel. And so I think our allies are all deeply concerned about the prospect of a Trump presidency with good reason. And I think also our enemies are salivating at the prospect of a Trump presidency. And some of them are working hard within our country to make that happen.
Yeah, I actually don't. Go ahead, Rob.
I was going to say another factor to not overlook is that there were actually good people that served in Trump's administration in the first term. I mean, Nikki Haley was Secretary of State. You had decent, good people, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Secretary of Defense. There were good people in place who served. A lot of them quit or resigned during the term. I just don't think he's going to get that kind of person around him. Trump's a smart man. Okay. He's managed to keep himself in the public eye for 40 or 50 years now. He's a smart man. He's going to surround himself with yes men next time. He's not going to appoint people who will stand up and tell him no.
That's right.
Mike Pence. He's not going to pick another Mike Pence as a VP who will tell him no. He's going to surround himself with people who are yes men and yes women, and that will make him fundamentally more dangerous.
Yeah, I actually don't know how I would answer this question, because if he loses, while he wouldn't have the literal reins of power, he still has social media. And in this day and age, that's very powerful. All he has to do is send out a directive for his supporters to go and attack the White House. He could be much more direct than he was before. And I think that's a real danger. If he wins, he's got the nuclear codes. So that's an additional consideration. So I don't know how to answer the question. I think he's a danger no matter what. And I think about this from a historical perspective, like future historians looking back at this time, if Trump is elected in 2024, when you look at what happened at the end of his first term, think about all the chaos. And somehow Americans decided we need more of this. This wasn't disqualifying. After 4 years, it didn't matter. Or in some cases, people believe it didn't happen. They were simply tourists who were let into the White House, who were invited in, who were simply caught up in the moment. History will not be kind to this country if Trump is elected again. And while that in and of itself isn't enough to make a decision, I think that's something that I think that's a reality. And I think, unfortunately, with Trump being in court several times this year, again, all those things would be disqualifying under normal eras of American politics. People have said, who are currently in elective office have said they would still support Trump if he were imprisoned, while he was in prison. You can't reason with somebody like that. I don't know how we break this fever. And so because of that, I think Trump is a danger no matter what happens in November of this year. I don't know which is higher on the scale of danger, him being in the office or him being out of the office. I can see both sides. But again, I think he's a risk until he just no longer is in the picture.
I think
one of the, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Rob.
I was going to say, I don't think ever in my life have I been more wrong about anything than I was in 2016 when I made this statement. Trump won't be that bad because the elder leaders in the Republican Party will rein him in. That was so wrong. I can't even believe how wrong I was. It was a fundamental misunderstanding on my part of human nature. And if we've learned anything over the last 8 years, it's that nobody's going to rein him in. Mm-hmm. Even our governor here in Georgia, Brian Kemp, who at times has stood up to Trump, at times has distanced himself from Trump, to the point that Trump ran somebody against him in a primary who lost. even last week, he said he would still support the ticket if Trump's on it. And so you can almost count on one hand the number of Republican leaders who were actually willing to stand up. And, I don't exempt my Democratic friends. If they ever had their own demagogue, they might do the same thing. So there's no hope there that suddenly some leaders in other places are going to grow a backbone and stand up to it. That's just simply not going to happen.
The thing that breaks my heart is we've not only seen that in politics, but the church, who we might expect to be a moral voice in times like these. In so many ways, the church, particularly the white evangelical church, of which I'm a part, has chosen to bury its head in the sand or to become an accomplice. And I'm not talking about simply voting for Donald Trump. I have many, many friends who are great people who voted for Donald Trump and will do it again. But it's the cheerleading and the enabling and the excusing and the acceptance of out and out lies and the grossest of behavior and corruption. That's what breaks my heart. So those moral guardrails have failed in many quarters. And that concerns me. People think sometimes, and I've been accused of simply being anti-Trump or being too political. Really, my biggest concern beyond politics is what this is doing in churches, what it is doing in families and relationships and neighborhoods. And so I agree with you, Melvin, that there's a danger whatever happens. I mean, we live in dangerous times, and because people have discovered ways to make money and gain influence by being provocateurs, that's going to continue. As long as there's a market for it, it'll continue, and it'll continue past Trump. Trump was simply a symptom of a problem that apparently has been there for a long time and will be after he's gone.
And I'll tell you, I think one of the maybe one of the few guardrails that kind of held up during the Trump years, and I'll speak out for my fellow lawyers here, was the court system. Yeah. And, even in the post-election cases that Trump filed, I think there were like 62 of them, and he lost all of those, and that included in front of Trump-appointed judges who generally held to the rule of law. But I'm very concerned that in a second Trump term, we would start to see a fracturing of the legal system, of the courts, judges ruling in ways that are not consistent with the rule of law. And to me, if that guardrail goes, there's nothing left. There's just nothing left. It's right. We just hit rock bottom.
Well, I've got one more question, and we'll wind down this conversation. Let's make this a little more personal. Do either of you think you'll ever run for an elected office?
When I was in my early 20s, I was very, very politically active. I was very involved in campaigns as a volunteer, conservative Republican campaigns. And I remember at a couple of different events, I had elected politicians, high government officials encourage me that I needed to run for office. And, they were offering support if I did. I was a kid. I was 22, 23 years old. Now, that could mess with anybody's head. But when you're 22 or 23, that can really, really mess you up and inflate your ego. And I strongly considered it. After much prayer and counsel, I determined that's not the course I would take. And I'm very grateful for that. I can't imagine, let's just say in Alabama, right now there is no place, no platform whatsoever for a person like me, who is conservative, but not wholly sold out to MAGA. And so I can't imagine it. Plus, I believe that there are other things that I'm supposed to do with my life. I do having said that, I do pray that good people will run for office, people of integrity and courage and vision. We certainly need them.
Yeah. I mean, I think everybody, just what you talked about earlier, Melvin, you have the gift of empathy. Everybody's got different gifts. Some are definitely called to serve by running for office. And we need, like Stephen said, we desperately need good people to run for office. I never thought it would be my cup of tea. When I was like you, Stephen, when I was young, I mean, I was college Republican. I would have been more interested in working on a political campaign back then than I ever would have been in actually running for office, though. That part of it was not ever something and now there's no way I would put my family through that, not with the atmosphere we have today. I just couldn't see it, which I guess is bad because somebody has to, or there won't be any good people running.
Right. That's the challenge. And for me, I mentioned in the first episode of this podcast with the three of us, I worked in state government in Texas, where I live here. And after several years, I was eventually the speechwriter for the sitting governor. So I got to see the inside of how the machine works, the sausage being made on a daily basis. And after 5 years, I decided I didn't want to be a part of that. I just didn't like the way it looked. And things were way better then than they are now. It's much, much worse now. I left politics in 2001. So this has been 20 plus years, and it's much, much worse now. So I'm much less likely to go back into that arena. But people like us are needed more now than ever before. And it's such a challenge. My wife has been trying to talk me into running for office for 5 years. And I keep saying, I don't want to do this because I don't want what would happen to you to happen. This is my way of protecting you, that I not run for an office. And there have been times when I thought, well, maybe now maybe courage is what I need to demonstrate here. And I know she could probably handle more than I would want her to, but I just don't know. I think I'm qualified. I think I could do a good job, but I just don't know if that's what I'm called to do. And so I've thought maybe I should run for like justice of the peace or a county commissioner, somewhere at a more local level rather than Congress or Senate or some national office in DC. So maybe that's something we seriously need to consider. People, not necessarily the three of us, but people who are willing to work across political borders, people who are willing to reach across the aisle, people who are men and women of goodwill. Maybe those people need to find some way to get involved. Again, for you two, I'm going to say don't close your minds, because I think there may be an opportunity there for you, and I'll do the same.
Well, you would never want to completely close your mind. I do think for the three of us, let's say we felt called to run for it, and I do think you should only do it if you feel a calling to it. What would you run as? Would the three of us run as a Republican, put up billboards and say, but not that kind of Republican? Would we run as a Democrat, but say, well, we're more of a moderate Democrat? Would they have us? I mean, we're kind of men without a home.
We're outcasts. I would run as an independent, and I would have zero chance to win.
Yeah.
That's my challenge in Alabama, in most places in Alabama. I mean, if you run for dog catcher, you have to pledge your fealty to Donald Trump. And, I hope that we can move past that so that we can have competitive races and we can once again have diversity of thought and ideas, so that in our state, which continually lags behind most of the country in a lot of key metrics, I would like to see us have some fresh ideas and some fresh leadership that wasn't bound to the whims of one man or a cult of personality. At this particular moment, there are a few places few places in our state where that's possible. The good news is we've had some redistricting here in our state. I am in a new district, and we will have a very competitive race between a Republican and a Democrat for Congress. I think over time, the eyes of the nation are going to be on this district.
Okay, well, I think that's a good place to wind down this episode. Our guests today have been Pastor Stephen Simpson from Alabama and Attorney Rob Ryan from Georgia. Gentlemen, thank you again for having the guts to willingly discuss these topics openly and honestly. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Melvin. Thank you, Mel and Rob.
Thank you, Steve.
That's it for this week's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another great storytelling journey. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go. That was Stories from Real Life with your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Join us again next time for another great storytelling journey. See you then.